Good morning. So today we're going to talk not so much about accents, but about vocabulary. Now, we've mentioned vocabulary before, and I've suggested that if you want to appear posh, that you're going to need to work on your vocabulary and try to find a broad range of words to use, because a posh person is going to be educated, they're going to use lots of different words. You should try to avoid using words that are very general, like good or nice, and try to find words a bit more specific. You should try to avoid using the word very. Um, Try to say things like dreadfully, remarkably, awfully. Those things sound a lot more posh than saying very or rather. So rather than saying it's very big, say it's rather big. Okay? But in this video, we're going to talk about something specific. We're going to talk about the U and non-U list. U words and non-U words. Now, this originates with a linguist in the 20th century called Alan Ross. So he argued that there is a difference in language and vocabulary between people who are upper class and everybody else. And this idea was popularized by a lady called Nancy Mitford. Now, she was one of the Mitford sisters. These girls were from an aristocratic family. One of Nancy Mitford's sisters was Unity Mitford, who was famously a Nazi sympathizer. And when Britain went to war with Germany in the Second World War, she tried to kill herself by shooting herself in the head. She also had another sister, Diana Mosley, the wife of Sir Oswald Mosley, the leader of the British Union of Fascists, and she and her husband were locked up during the Second World War because of their pro-Nazi views. But Nancy Mitford, however, was very anti-Nazi. She supported the Labour Party. She was on the left. However, she was possibly a little bit snooty. She used to refer to Princess Margaret as Princess Peeptoe. She thought that Princess Margaret's peep-toe sandals were rather common. And Nancy Mitford wrote an article entitled The English Aristocracy for a magazine called Encounter Magazine, and that was in 1954. Encounter Magazine was quite an intellectual magazine for educated people, and it took a left-wing political stance, although it had writers from all sorts of different subjects and persuasions writing for them, a lot of them quite famous, like Nancy Mitford herself. And Encounter Magazine, it was edited by Irving Kristol, who, although he was left-wing at the time, he became one of the founders of the neoconservative movement. Neoconservatism is a subject that interests me enormously. I've read quite a few books on that. But that's a topic for another video, perhaps. But interestingly, Encounter Magazine was funded by the CIA. Later in life, Irving Kristol amusingly recalled that he was a CIA asset. The CIA was concerned that the British left might be sympathetic to Soviet communism, and so they put money into this magazine Encounter to promote an anti-communist view amongst left-wing people in Britain, to make sure that socialists in this country were firmly against communism. But this article wasn't terribly political. It was about the culture and vocabulary and lifestyle of the aristocracy. And it contained a glossary of U words and non-U words. This distinction between the words used by the upper classes, the U words, and the words that I think were the words of the middle class, the non-U. And it's really interesting to compare these two sets of words. You might think that the more sophisticated, the posher words would be the U words, the upper class words, but actually they tend to be more straight to the point, more blunt, whereas the non-U words are more polite, more refined, perhaps a little bit pretentious. A lot of these non-U words are of French origin. So, for instance, if you go to a restaurant, you would have a napkin if you're from the upper classes. That's the U word. Whereas if you are middle class, you'd have a serviette, which is a French word, and in your in your in your in your drawing room, if you are upper class, you would sit down on your sofa. Whereas if you are middle class and you use non-U words, you would sit down in your lounge and you sit down on your settee. So the settee, that's a French origin word, whereas the U word is the sofa, the English sounding word. Yeah, so I think maybe the idea was that the middle class people want to sound a bit pretentious, a bit sophisticated, so they use these French origin words. An interesting one is what versus pardon. So if you're upper class and you haven't quite heard somebody and you want them to repeat themselves, you say what. Whereas if you're middle class, you say pardon. Yeah. I don't know, maybe whether when you were a kid you had some teacher or some old lady or some auntie say to you, oh, you shouldn't say what, you should say pardon. But you can tell them, no, we use U words, we use a posh word, so we say what. So pardon, that's a French origin word, so you don't say that, you say what instead. And if you want to sound posh, you don't say what, you say what. You say it with an H to begin it with. I think perhaps pardon, maybe it sounds a little bit subservient, perhaps. So it sounds like you're asking pardon of somebody. Oh, pardon me. Whereas if you're aristocratic, if you're upper class, then most of the people that you know are either going to be your social inferiors or they're going to be your social equals. So you don't need to be subservient to them. You can say, what? What did you say? If you're eating dinner, you would finish the meal with a pudding if you are upper class, whereas if you're middle class, you'd finish it with a sweet or a dessert. A slightly more pretentious word to use. These words, the U words are very blunt. So if somebody's got lots of money, if you're upper class, you say that they're rich. Whereas if you're middle class, you say they're wealthy. So that's a bit more polite, a bit more refined. And if somebody's got a problem with their head, if you're upper class, you say they're mad. Whereas if you're middle class, you would say they're mental. Perhaps today, saying that somebody is mental might not be very politically correct. You might be more likely to say that they're mentally unwell or mentally ill or they've got a mental health problem. But perhaps that's a bit more polite than saying that they're mad. I mean, I work with mental health professionals and I often hear them say the word mad, maybe with a certain amount of irony. They tend to say that somebody is mad if they're in acute psychosis, as opposed to them being depressed, being in low mood, or having a personality disorder, I think. I think some of these words are maybe a little bit out of date. Probably if you made this list today, some of the vocabulary would be different. This was from the 1950s. So, for instance, upper class people are supposed to say looking glass, whereas middle class people say mirror. And looking glass, that's quite an old-fashioned word. I'm not sure whether upper class people today would use the word looking glass. Sometimes you hear people apply the words you and non-you to things rather than words. So people might say that some furniture is very non-you, meaning it's not posh. Or they might say that a particular restaurant is non-you, meaning it's not a very posh restaurant. I think probably some of the things that I like are maybe a little bit non-you. For instance, I really like metal, and I think metal is most definitely non-you. I like eating burgers and going to fast food restaurants and eating pork scratchings. All those things are very non-you. If we're talking about manners, having a house rule that guests have to take their shoes off, That's something I do, and I think that would probably be considered to be a bit non-you. But well, that's me. I'm just not really a very posh person. Maybe I might speak in a slightly posh accent, but the reality is that I'm a very non-you person. Anyway, so if you enjoyed this content, please do give it a like or consider subscribing if you want to see more videos about this sort of thing. And please do enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Have a fantastic afternoon. Bye bye.